SLT Mobitel Fiber, the fiber of the nation. SLT Mobitel Fiber, the fiber of the nation.
Surf Excel නම් භාගයයි මාසයකට වඩා රිදි සෝදායි.
Tonight, the time has come. With the 48th UNHRC session set for Monday, a torture report surfaces on Sri Lanka. As the council president says, no one is perfect.
In relation to any member state of the council, and I have to say at the outset that there is no one country in the world which has a perfect human rights record.
Not for everyone. The Sri Lanka Medical Association urges authorities to keep Pfizer shots as third doses for over 60s who received Sinopharm and for high-risk 12 to 18s.
There was a study from Bahrain. People who were given Sinopharm had slightly more deaths.
The method. Ministry officials explain Pfizer district allocation.
Health Ministry is taking decisions on the distribution of vaccine based on the availability of stock on a given vaccine and the target population.
Slow down. The Monetary Board imposes cash margin deposits for non-essential and non-urgent imported goods. All that and much more coming up on First at 9 this Thursday, the 9th of September 2021.
දසනකාන්තී චූර්ණය සහිත ලීවර් ආයිෂ් දන්තාලේපය දත්වල ඇති ප්‍රශ්න 10ක් වලකයි.
From AdaDerana, this is AdaDerana First at 9. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
Good evening and welcome to First at 9. I'm Dhamma Kekanai. Now then, with the 48th regular session of the United Nations Human Rights Council session set to begin on Monday, the pressure has begun to build against Sri Lanka. Releasing a media statement, Executive Director of the International Truth and Justice Project, Yasmin Suga, outlined excerpts from a report that her organisation aims to present to the UNHRC, citing an increase in torture and sexual violence perpetrated against members of the Tamil community by the military and police. The report has been based on the testimonies of 15 Tamil victims who have sought refuge in the United Kingdom, who claim to have been targeted for their participation in protest marches and events in the north of the island to commemorate the dead and missing.
As has been the case in the run-up to past United Nations Human Rights Council sessions, Sri Lanka's human rights situation has been thrust into the spotlight once again. With the 48th sessions of the United Nations Human Rights Council set to begin on the 13th of this month, the heat has been turned up. Just yesterday, a press release from non-governmental organisation Johannesburg-based International Truth and Justice Project was released that paints a very dim picture of life in Sri Lanka. According to its executive director Yasmin Suga, herself no stranger to Sri Lanka's tussles with the United Nations Human Rights Council, the island is going through a torture epidemic. In her communique highlighting contents of a report that has been filed for the upcoming sessions, Suga says that the incidents of torture have increased in the country since the current government came into power in November 2019. Suga says that her organisation has recorded statements from 15 Tamil victims who are currently in the United Kingdom, claiming torture and sexual violence at the hands of Sri Lankan military and police personnel during this period. She adds that the most recent cases targeted individuals who participated in the Pothubil to Polikandi or P2P protest this year, as well as those who attended commemoration events for the dead and disappeared. Suga's report also reveals that the victims' families were forced to pay bribes for the release, after which they were forced to escape Sri Lanka by walking across mountains, hiding in the boots of cars, and by crossing the English Channel in rubber dinghies. Several of the victims had also claimed to be volunteers for Tamil political parties, and based on these statements, Suga wants Sri Lanka to be at the top of the international community's agenda in Geneva this time around. She also expresses her doubts that the situation will improve in the near future, citing the successive failures of Sri Lankan governments to prosecute those responsible for both the JVP-era violence and for violence aimed at the Tamil community. The system, she says, is incapable of reforming itself. The report on Sri Lanka, which will be one of the 87 reports to be presented during the sessions, will seek to instigate some level of censure of the Sri Lankan government and shore up international opinion in the run-up to the United Nations General Assembly's general debate on the 21st of this month. However, the level of action that can be taken against a member state seems largely limited, given United Nations Human Rights Council President Nazat S. Khan's response to a question on the current political instability in Brazil and the Council's stance on the issue. According to Khan, the Council's job is not to demonize member countries, as there is no one country in the world with a spotless human rights record.
In relation to any member state of the Council, and I have to say at the outset that there is no one country in the world which has a perfect human rights record. We all need to do a little bit of self-analysis about how we can all do better. And so the business of demonizing any particular country is not the business of the Council. Secondly, if there have been human rights issues or violations anywhere around the world, including those from those countries which are members of the Council, then it is for the Council to take action if it does. And it can do so in many ways, whether it is intervening in the interactive dialogues and discussions, both states as well as NGOs, whether it is by raising the attention of the Council in other ways, whether it is by putting pressure on member states to table resolutions. That's a matter for states and for NGOs. And the one of the most valuable things about the Council is this voice of the NGOs, which I've always called the conscience of the Council.
Now, shifting our focus towards the pandemic situation, the Health Ministry today laid to rest a notion that the Pfizer vaccine is being given specifically to certain areas of the country because of its higher effectiveness, by refuting the claims. Deputy Director General of Education and Research at the Ministry of Health, Dr. Hemantha Herath, explained that the authorities have allocated the vaccine to districts based on availability of quantity, that is, and also population numbers.
Despite whatever adversities the country currently faces, Sri Lanka's vaccine program is continuing uninterrupted. So much so that health authorities are now close to fully inoculating the country's population of over 30 years of age. As of last evening, 9,994,589 people had been fully vaccinated. There were also 3,134,167 persons awaiting the second dose. With this being the case, health authorities decided to vaccinate the country's 20 to 30 year age group as well. And so far, the Ministry of Health says that 34% of the people within this age group have been vaccinated with one dose, while 12% have been fully inoculated. As such, the program is now in effect in the Western Province as well as the Hambantota Galle and Matara districts. However, certain questions have been raised as to why the Pfizer vaccine is being used to inoculate the people of this age group in the Hambantota Galle and Matara, while those in the Western Province are given the Sinopharm vaccine. In response, the Ministry of Health had a simple explanation.
Most of the time, Health Ministry is taking decisions on the distribution of vaccine based on the availability of stocks on a given vaccine and the target population that is available for the vaccination. So that is why certain vaccines are getting only in small quantities and that need to be distributed in places where the target population is less, whereas other vaccines which are coming in high quantities can be given into other districts with high population.
Deputy Director General of Education and Research at the Ministry of Health, Dr. Hemantha Herath, also stressed that there is no such thing as a superior vaccine against COVID.
We know that there is a notion created due to different reasons that certain vaccines are superior to other vaccines. But as the Health Department or Ministry of Health, we have identified all these vaccines by an expert committee, not by only one committee but two committees, and they have found that all these vaccines are equally safe and equally effective. So therefore, this problem has created basically because certain countries are requesting specific vaccines for people who are entering into those countries. And not only Sri Lanka, many other countries are affected by such decisions. However, we are making representation even to the WHO and other organizations to make sure that this inequality need to be avoided. This will be rectified in future.
Even the World Health Organization stresses that all the jabs given emergency use listing by it are safe and effective.
Some countries are refusing entry to people who have been fully vaccinated with a vaccine that has WHO emergency use listing, but which has not been approved by their own national regulators. This is creating more chaos, confusion, and discrimination, with some countries even refusing to use certain vaccines because of concern their citizens will be denied entry to other countries. WHO emergency use listing follows a rigorous process based on internationally recognized standards. All vaccines that have received WHO emergency use listing are safe and effective in preventing severe disease and death, including against the Delta variant. We thank those countries that recognize all vaccines with WHO emergency use listing, and we call on all countries to do the same.
After encountering a vaccine shortage at the inception of the immunization drive, Sri Lanka had to turn towards China for its vaccine requirements. In this respect, the island may have been fortunate to have had the Sinopharm jab available in the delivered quantities.
Because manufacturers have prioritized or been legally obliged to fulfill bilateral deals with rich countries willing to pay top dollar, low-income countries have been deprived of the tools to protect their people.
The WHO has on many occasions said that their target remains to support every country to vaccinate at least 10% of its population by the end of this month, at least 40% by the end of this year, and 70% of the world's population by the middle of next year. They, however, note that almost 90% of high-income countries have now reached the 10% target, and more than 70% have reached the 40% target, while not a single low-income country has reached either target. Nevertheless, this is where Sri Lanka shines. Despite being a low middle-income country, the island nation has been able to inoculate over 40% of its total population, and it's not even the end of the month.
Where they're getting high coverage with these vaccines now, you've seen it. They are still having COVID cases, but their COVID deaths are plummeting. In the countries with the low coverage, they are still having high rates of COVID deaths. And this is what we need to change, and change as rapidly as possible. Should there be a moratorium on boosters? Absolutely. Should there be a moratorium on vaccinating people at low risk of severe disease or death? Absolutely.
The need for a third dose or booster shot has been a frequently discussed topic of late, though Sri Lanka has already made a purchase order for a batch of Pfizer vaccine intended to be administered as boosters. The WHO believes there still isn't a need for it.
A month ago, I called for a global moratorium on booster doses at least until the end of September, to prioritize vaccinating the most at-risk people around the world who are yet to receive their first dose. There has been little change in the global situation since then. So today, I'm calling for an extension of the moratorium until at least the end of the year, to enable every country to vaccinate at least 40% of its population. Third doses may be necessary for the most at-risk populations, where there is evidence of waning immunity against severe disease and death, such as the very small group of immunocompromised people who did not respond sufficiently to their initial dose or are no longer producing antibodies.
Now, staying with the whole third dose scenario of a vaccine against COVID-19, member of the Sri Lanka Medical Association's COVID committee, Dr. Rajiva De Silva, offered an explanation as to why the association had called for the vaccination of over 60s who have received both Sinopharm doses with a Pfizer vaccine. He stated that the recommendation made by the association was based on studies conducted in Bahrain and the University of Sri Jayawardenepura, adding that it was done in order to prevent severe disease and death.
In recent times, certain medical organizations presented proposals requesting that people over the age of 60 who have been vaccinated with the Sinopharm jab be given the Pfizer vaccine as a third dose. The latest to join these calls is the Sri Lanka Medical Association. They propose that people over 60 who had been given 2 doses of the Sinopharm vaccine and those with a weak immune system be given a third dose using one of AstraZeneca, Pfizer and Moderna vaccines. They cited a study from Bahrain and data from the University of Sri Jayawardenepura to indicate that people below 60 years of age produce a robust immune response to Sinopharm and are protected from death or severe disease. Therefore, they recommend that all people without underlying health conditions between 80 and 60 years of age be given the Sinopharm vaccine. As such, in order to obtain clarification over the matter, First at 9 spoke to member of the COVID committee of the Sri Lanka Medical Association, Dr. Rajiva De Silva.
We recommend that people over 60 years who have been given 2 doses of Sinopharm be given a 3rd dose of either a Pfizer, Moderna or an AstraZeneca vaccine at least 1 month after the second Sinopharm dose. Now that's based on 2 factors. One is that there was a study from Bahrain which showed that while Sinopharm, AstraZeneca and Pfizer have reduced deaths and severe disease in all age groups compared to the unvaccinated, in a slight proportion of cases over 50 years, people who were given Sinopharm had slightly more deaths and severe disease. I have to reiterate that all vaccines used in Sri Lanka have saved lives and have saved severe infections. But because of this data from Bahrain and also Professor Neelika Malavige's data, which showed that about 7% of people over 60 given the Sinopharm vaccine have not produced antibodies. Now there are people who do not produce antibodies following vaccination, and these are people who have had organ transplants or bone marrow transplants, people with cancers, particularly blood cancers, people on dialysis, and people on what are called immunosuppressive drugs. So we suggest that every person who has had 2 doses of any vaccine be given a 3rd dose of Pfizer, AstraZeneca or Moderna at least 1 month after the 2nd dose.
We will see you shortly. Stay with us.
Big 3.
Welcome back. You're watching First at 9. Now, the University of AdaDerana has developed a new low-cost test kit to diagnose SARS-CoV-2 virus-infected patients in a relatively shorter time with a higher accuracy. The COVID-19 test kit has been priced at only 1,500 rupees. The test kit has already received the approval of the Technical Committee of the National Medicines Regulatory Authority. According to its developers, the accuracy levels of this test kit combined with QRT-PCR is very high at 97% compared to similar alternatives such as rapid antigen tests, in which the accuracy with QRT-PCR can be in the range of 12 to 71%. The test kit is equipped with an internal control assay based on human beta-actin messenger RNA, which can confirm the quality of the patient's sample received by the laboratory. The developers of the COVID test kit have presented it to Minister of Health Kehlia Rambukwala, who commended the new invention. Meanwhile, the Chief Executive Officer of the private company in charge of the National Medicines Regulatory Authority's database, who was arrested yesterday over the recent loss of data, was granted bail today. He was produced before the Colombo Magistrates Court. The Criminal Investigation Department apprehended him last evening pertaining to the incident in which several files in the NMRA's database were erased due to an alleged mistake by an engineer. It was revealed last July that some data in the system had been deleted, following which several parties, including the opposition, alleged a conspiracy. However, on the 4th of this month, it was revealed that the lost data had been recovered. Moving on with other local stories, Defence Secretary General Kamal Gunaratne today revealed that the Catholic Bishops' Conference and the Buddhist chief prelates were brought up to speed on the progress of the Easter Sunday terror attack probe. He, however, said that the Cardinal was not among the audience and considered that His Eminence is free to have his own views on the matter. Addressing a media briefing today, the Defence Secretary also urged people not to fall prey to rumourmongers who attempt to implicate President Gotabaya Rajapaksa in the incident.
තවත් පිරිසක් මේ අවස්ථාවේදී මහජන මතයක් ගොඩනගන්න හදනවා. ජනාධිපතිතුමා තමයි ඒ කාලේ මේක මේ බලයට එන්න කරපු කුමන්ත්‍රණයක් කියලා හිටන් මේ ජනාධිපතිතුමාව ඇදලා ගන්න හදනවා මේකට. ඉතින් මම ආරක්ෂක ලේකම්වරයා විදියට ඉතාමත්ම වගකීමෙන් කියනවා අපේ පොලිසිය CID එක මේ සම්පූර්ණ පරීක්ෂණ සෑහෙන දුරට දැනට පවත්වලා දිනවා. තවදුරටත් කරගෙනත් යනවා. උසාවියේ දැනට නඩු දාලා තියෙනවා. ට්‍රයල් ඇඩ් බා එකක් ගරු අග්‍රවිනිශ්චයකාරතුමා විසින් පත් කරලා තියෙනවා මේ සම්බන්ධයෙන්. ඒ නිසා මහජනතාවගෙන් ඉල්ලා සිටින මේ බොරු මති මතාන්තර වලට රැවටෙන්න එපා.
The Defence Secretary was also quizzed on the comments made by Archbishop of Colombo, His Eminence Malcolm Cardinal Ranjit.
මට ඇත්තටම කනගාටු මේ කාඩිනල් තුමා නොඑක් වර විවිධ දේවල් ප්‍රකාශ කළ දුනා. ඒක උන්වහන්සේගේ මතය. අපි සෑහෙන ගමනක් ඇවිල්ලා තියෙනවා. කාඩිනල් තුමා ඒ ප්‍රකාශ කරාට පස්සේ බුද්ධ්‍යංශවල නිලධාරීන් සහ පොලිසියේ නිලධාරීන් ගිහිල්ලා ඒ කතෝලික බිෂොප් තුමන්ලාගේ එකතුවට ගිහිල්ලා මං හිතන්නේ පැය 4ක විතර කරුණු පැහැදිලි කිරීමක් කරා. අවාසනාවකට එදා කාඩිනල් තුමා හිටියේ නෑ. නමුත් අනිත් බිෂොප් තුමන්ලා ඔක්කොම හිටියා. ඒ අය බොහොම සෑහීමකටපත් වුණා. ඊට පස්සේ දැනට සති දෙකකට ඉස්සෙල්ලා අරලියගහ මන්දිරයේදී නායක ස්වාමින් වහන්සේලා ඇතුළු සංඝ රත්නයටත් ඒ විදියටම බුද්ධි අංශවල සහ පොලිසිය CID ගේ නිලධාරීන් ගිහිල්ලා සෑහෙන වෙලාවක් මේකේ ප්‍රගතිය පිළිබඳ වාර්තාවක් ඉදිරිපත් කරා. උන්වහන්සේලාත් ඊ타මත්ම සෑහීමකටපත් වුණා. ඒ අතරේදී අපිට ඇතිවන තරජනත් මෙතකයි කියා නිම කළ නොහැකි. උදාහරණයට ගත්තොත් අපි එක්තරා ප්‍රසිද්ධ නීතිඥ මහත්මයෙක්ව අපි අත්අඩංගුවට අරන් තියෙනවා දැන් අවුරුද්දක පමණ කාලයක්. අද UN Human Rights Commission එකට පවා ලොකු රෙප්‍රසන්ටේෂන් එකක් යවලා තියෙන මේ පුද්ගලයාව අත්අඩංගුවට අරන් ඉන්නවයි කියලා. නමුත් අපි ගාව සාක්ෂි තියෙනවා ඒ පුද්ගලයාට විරුද්ධව එයා මේවට සම්බන්ධයි කියලා.
The Defence Secretary also responded to the question whether the former Attorney General can be summoned to the CID for questioning over his remarks that the Easter Sunday attacks are a conspiracy.
බැරි කමක් නැහැ. නීතිපතිතුමා ඒ තනතුරෙන් ගියාට පස්සේ එතුමා තවත් ඔබත් මමත් වගේම සාමාන්‍ය පුරවැසියෙක්. ඉතින් ඔබතුමා ඔය කියපු දේ අපිත් සැලකිල්ලට භාජනය කරලා තියෙනවා. කවුරු වුණත් යම්කිසි ප්‍රකාශයක් කරොත් ඒක CID එකේ පරීක්ෂණ වලට අවශ්‍ය දෙයක් නම් අපි ඒ ගැන පරීක්ෂණ පවත්වනවා. මං හිතන්නේ ඉදිරියේදී ඒ ගැන ක්‍රියාමාර්ගයක් CID එක අරගන්න.
කාදිනල් තුමන් කියන විදිහට අර ආණ්ඩු පාර්ශවයේත් කීප දෙනෙක් ඉන්නවා මේ පාස්කු ප්‍රහාරය සම්බන්ධව ජනාධිපති කොමිසමෙන් නිර්දේශ වෙලා. ඒ හින්දාද මේක කල්යන්නේ කියන ප්‍රශ්නේ තමයි දිගින් දිගටම කාදිනල් වහන්සේ ප්‍රකාශ කරන්නේ.
ඒ පාස්කු කොමිෂන් සභාවේ තිබු වාර්තා වුණත් නීතිපතිතුමා අධ්‍යයනය කරලා ඒ සම්බන්ධව ක්‍රියා කරා. ඉතින් එතනදී මේ රජයේ දේශපාලඥයෝ හෝ රජීය නිලධාරීන් සම්බන්ධ නැහැ කියන කරුණ අදාළ වෙන්නේ නැහැ විලා. ඒකින්ද ඒක නීතිපතිතුමාට ඒක එච්චර කරුණක් නෙවෙයි.
Now, in further moves to preserve the stability of the exchange rate and foreign currency market liquidity, the central bank's monetary board has imposed a cash margin deposit requirement for excessive imports of speculative nature. Now, the list of goods falling under this new requirement includes all imported non-essential and non-urgent goods that have seen imports up to July this year, almost eclipsing figures for the whole of 2020.
The Monetary Board of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka at its meeting held yesterday has decided to impose a 100% cash margin deposit requirement against the importation of selected goods in the non-essential and non-urgent category. The deposits will be expected to be made under letters of credit and documents against acceptance terms with licensed commercial banks and the National Savings Bank with immediate effect. The Monetary Board says that the decision to impose the cash margin deposit requirement is expected to support the central bank's ongoing efforts to preserve the stability of the exchange rate and foreign currency market liquidity by discouraging excessive imports of a speculative nature. As such, this will apply to telecommunication devices such as mobile telephones and fixed telephones, which it shows has seen an increase in imports during the January to July period this year, almost eclipsing the entire importation value of the goods in the whole of 2020. Further, home appliances such as fans, TVs, refrigerators, washing machines, digital cameras, hair clips, heaters, lamps, ovens, clothing and accessories, and a wide range of household and furniture items have been included. The new guidelines will also apply to rubber tires and air conditioners as well. In addition, food items and some alcoholic and non-alcoholic beverages too have been included in the list. Further, cosmetics and toiletries and other non-food consumables such as musical instruments, tobacco products, toys and stationery have also come under the new guidelines as well.
Now then, Sri Lankan shares recovered today, breaking a 4-day losing streak, helped by strong gains in the financial sector. Following an 8.22% loss yesterday, the CSE All Share Price Index closed up 2.54% at 8,986.40 points at the closing bell, but was still down over 3.5% for the week. The S&P SL 20 meanwhile also closed up today by 63 points to end at 3,376.04 points. Now with that, here's Dimantha Mathi with a brief report on today's market performance.
After yesterday's significant drop in the market, which is the fourth consecutive day the market was in the red, today we saw some sort of a recovery happening in a larger scale where we saw the ASPI spiking by around 222 points, a significant increase compared to the heavy plunge that we saw yesterday. So the ASPI significantly went up but closed slightly below the 9,000 mark at 8,996 points. So the S&P SL20 also supported with a gain of 66 points. Overall, what we are seeing is a positive trend where we saw a lot of bargain hunters coming from the early part of the day itself with a significant buying interest, especially the counters that are retail favorite counters, which are dominated in the transportation sector and the capital goods sector. So these two sectors are the sectors that are mostly traded in the market during the last few weeks.
Now then, former President of Afghanistan, Ashraf Ghani, who fled the country as the Taliban took over Kabul, has apologized to the Afghans. Taking to Twitter, he said that it was never his intention to abandon the people, while also refuting allegations of him fleeing with a large sum of money. In the meantime, Afghanistan's first female ambassador to the United States says she's not surprised by the manner in which the Taliban took over the country.
The Taliban drew from its inner high echelons to fill top posts in Afghanistan's new government, including an associate of the Islamist militant movement's founder as premier and a wanted man on the US terrorism list as interior minister. Sirajuddin Haqqani, the new interior minister, is the son of the founder of the Haqqani network, classified as a terrorist group by Washington. He is one of FBI's most wanted men due to his involvement in suicide attacks and ties with the Al-Qaeda. Mullah Hassan Akhund, an associate of the movement's late founder Mullah Omar, was named head of the Afghanistan's new government. This is rather difficult to digest for the rest of the world, or at least to many. For Afghanistan's first female ambassador to the United States, Roya Rahmani, it is quite clear as to who is responsible for this turn of events.
The US government has indicated that they were met by surprise. I, as an Afghan, was not surprised by the fact that the Taliban took over Afghanistan the way they did and how quickly they did, partly because of the lack of leadership by the Afghan government that was in place at the time. It was not the Afghan forces that they were not willing to fight for their freedom and for protection of their people. It was the leadership that was corrupt, and they handed over basically the country to the Taliban, and their actions led to the consequences that we are seeing at this point.
Meanwhile,
and that's it from all of us here at First at 9. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.